Hi guys, tonight we're going to start our new unit, which is consciousness. Now this is a sort of controversial and highly debated topic both within scientific realms and also philosophically. So consciousness has been this mysterious phenomena that's central to our experience as humans, but nonetheless it's very difficult to pin down. And in my personal studies I've found that this question of what consciousness is basically forms the basis of most of the world's religions, if not all. So in psychology, though, we talk about consciousness as our alertness, as being awake versus being unconscious and not being alert or awake. We also talk about it as being our self-awareness, the ability to think about ourselves, the ability to think about our thinking and our feelings. Having free will, being able to make a conscious decision so that you're weighing out different scenarios, you're thinking certain thoughts, and then making your decision based on those conscious thoughts. Anything that's involved in your mental content, your thoughts, your imaginings, this is all consciousness. But to explore this deeper, this consciousness, it helps to choose a definition. So in the text, it's defined as our awareness of ourselves and our environment. Very broad, generalized concept, but it kind of runs into some problems because if we're going to say that consciousness is this uniquely human thing, but we're defining it as our awareness of ourselves and our environment, aren't animals aware of their environment? Aren't animals aware of themselves in terms of they know when they're hungry, they know when they're hurt, they know when they're cold, they know when they want food. So how is our awareness different? Perhaps because we have a uniquely, or not, narrative experience of that awareness. It has meaning. We give it meaning, so we have this sense of self that has a story. I think that's a good working definition of consciousness, is the narrative experience of our awareness, the sense of self. So we have different forms of consciousness. As you all know, we are in a different mental state based on the time of day. So some occur spontaneously, such as daydreaming, which you might be doing during first or fifth period during psychology class. I don't know. When you're drowsy, you're in a different state of consciousness. Your awareness is a little dull, so you're not sort of on point and ready to respond. And then when you're dreaming, that's just a whole different realm, obviously. Then some other forms of consciousness are physiologically induced, such as hallucinations by stimulating certain parts of the brain, by taking certain psychoactive substances. During sex, orgasm is a different form of consciousness. Food or starvation causes this. But then there's psychologically induced forms of consciousness, such as sensory deprivation. That might be a little physiologically induced as well. Hypnosis, meditation, yoga, these different spiritual practices are all designed to invoke these different forms of consciousness. Now these, as I said, form the basis of most of the world's religions. If you look down here, you see some Buddhist monks, you see some indigenous shamans. All these people use these states of consciousness to find out facts about different areas of our experience as humans. So we've also studied consciousness scientifically, obviously. So some rare unconscious patients have responses to conversation. So the implication is, don't judge a book by its cover when it comes to consciousness. For example, Stephen Hawking, the famous scientist, doesn't look like he has much consciousness because he suffers from MS, so his body is very sort of sclerotic and it doesn't look like he has much consciousness, but he's one of the most intelligent individuals ever. Damn it. Sorry guys, I got interrupted there. Mrs. Bailey just dropped some things off in the room. So the long story short, don't judge a book by its cover when it comes to consciousness. The mind may be doing things that the body doesn't show. So what's going on in the brain that generates our experience of consciousness? This is a very hot debate. Is consciousness completely dependent upon the brain? Or, as a lot of people state, is consciousness independent of the brain? Can consciousness exist outside of the brain? So one view is that consciousness is synchronized and coordinated brain activity that generates consciousness, or at least is a sign that conscious activity is occurring. This is the view that psychology and science in general takes, that the consciousness is a phenomena that comes out of the brain. Now, if you ask religious traditions, they'll tell you the opposite, that the brain exists to house consciousness, that consciousness existed before the brain. Now, we're not going to get into all that. If it was philosophy, we would. But we're going to take the scientific view.
Caitlin Nelson, please come to the main office. Caitlin Nelson, please come to the main office.
Okay, so we have conscious activity and unconscious activity. Sorry about that announcement. I'm doing this during prep period. So the conscious high track, we say that we have two tracks in our minds, a conscious track and an unconscious track. So the high track is when we take deliberate actions and that we know we're doing it. Problem solving, naming an object, defining a word, talking to your friends. Unconscious is what happens automatically without us being aware of them. When we walk, we're not really paying attention to it. Our phobias that just sort of happen without us being aware of it. Processing sensory details, all of this automatic processing that we talked about in our memory unit. These are unconscious activities. So when you look at something, here's an example from the book, you look and you say, oh, look, I see a bird. That's a conscious activity. But there are unconscious things that you're noticing too. For example, the motion, the form, the depth, all this is happening unconsciously. So all the time, unconscious things are happening and conscious things are happening. So that's why we say there's these two tracks that are happening at the same time. So for example, when I'm driving a car, I'm thinking about all sorts of stuff. I'm paying attention to the radio, but sometimes I zone out for about 10 minutes or so, and then I snap back and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm driving a car. So unconsciously, my body's doing the car driving, but consciously, I'm thinking about the war in Syria or the plight of poor people in our country, whatever I'm listening to on the radio. So, in one study, students showed brain activity related to pushing a button before they were aware of their decision to push the button, which is kind of interesting. Does this mean that the decision is an illusion? I don't know. What experiment from the beginning of the semester does this remind you of? This probably doesn't apply to us because these are out of order. So why do we have two tracks? The possible benefit is not having to think about everything we do all at once. Our body kind of goes on autopilot and performs functions that we don't have to think about. So there's some unusual consequences of this, such as blind sight, selective attention, and selective inattention. Now, blind sight has to do, so for example, there was this case study. A woman with brain damage had no eye damage, but she was unable to use her eyes to report what was in front of her. However, she was able to use her eyes to help her take action, such as putting mail in slots. So this shows that eyesight is also dependent upon conscious brain activity. So describing the mail in the slot, the high road or conscious track in this case is known as the visual perception track. Judging the size and distance well enough to put the mail in the slot is the low road or unconscious automatic track. In this case, it's known as the visual action track. So we have these two tracks, perception and action. Now, selective attention, so there's millions of bits of information that are coming into our senses every single second, all the time. So we have the skill of selective attention. Our brain is able to choose what to focus on and select what to notice. We'd be completely overwhelmed if we had to pay attention to every single thing that comes into our conscious field. So the good news is that we can focus our mental spotlight on a conversation even when other conversations are going on around us. This is known as the cocktail party effect. So for example, I went out to dinner with my wife for her birthday last night, and there was these ladies to the left of us that were having a very loud, obnoxious conversation. And at first it bothered me, but then my wife and I were able to focus in on our own conversation and block them out. And later on, she said to me, my wife, "Did you hear what those ladies were saying?" And I said, "Actually, no, I didn't." So I experienced the cocktail party effect. The bad news is that we can hyper-focus on a conversation while driving a car, like I said before, putting the driver and passenger at risk. Luckily, I think I've gotten pretty good at that. And selective attention is what we focus on, what we notice. Selective inattention is what we are not focused on, or what we do not notice. So this refers to our failure to notice a part of our environment when our attention is directed elsewhere. So we just leave certain things out because we're focused on something. It's pretty simple. So inattentional blindness, so various experiments show us that when our attention is focused, we miss seeing what others may think is obvious for us. Some magic tricks, sleight of hands, take advantage of this phenomenon. So for example, 2/3 of people didn't notice when the person they were giving direction to was replaced by a similar looking person. So this guy here wasn't paying attention to this guy, so when he was switched with this guy, he didn't even notice. Maybe that's what you're doing all day. they're even wearing different clothes. So choice blindness. In one experiment, people chose their favorite among two jams, but when the jar's contents were deceptively reversed in taste again, people described the same jar's content as their chosen jam. So this shows that consciousness is kind of tricky and gets tricked very easily. So now we're going to get into sleep, which is probably one of the most mysterious things about our experience as a human. For 8 hours, a third of our lives, we spent unconscious, laying in a bed. That's kind of crazy if you think about it. So when we're sleeping, are we really unconscious and dead to the world, or is there a window to consciousness open? So remember we said that in sleep, the reticular formation is susceptible to awareness. So if that guy comes in your room and tickles your feet, you're going to wake up. So consciousness is easily accessible. However, we're asleep. So we're more unconscious than conscious. So we move around. How do we know to stop falling out of bed? Maybe some of you do. Sometimes we incorporate real-world noise into our dreams. Your mom's yelling at you to get up. All of a sudden, your mom's in your dream. Some noises wake us up more easily than others, such as a baby's cry. That's an evolutionary advantage. So how do we learn about sleeps and dreams? They have EEG monitors, brainwave monitors, muscle movements during sleep. We can expose the sleeping person to noise and words and then examine the effects on the brain and memory and the mind, so we can see whether or not they're processing these things consciously. And then we can wake people and see which mental state, for example dreaming, goes with which body or brain state. So there's these daily rhythms when we sleep. These are called circadian rhythms, and these are really important. So this is the body's natural 24-hour cycle, roughly matched to the day and night cycle of light and dark. So over the 24-hour cycle, the following factors vary, rising and falling over the course of the day and night. Body temperature, arousal energy, mental sharpness. So certain periods of the day you're more sharp, other periods you're a little dull. And then it varies from individual to individual and with age. So certain people are night owls, certain people are morning larks. Personally, I'm a night owl. So sleep stages refer to distinct patterns of brain waves and muscle activity that are associated with different types of consciousness and sleep. So there's 4 types of sleep. And these sleep cycles, we cycle through these different types of sleep. So sleep cycles refer to the patterns of shifting through all the different sleep stages over the course of the night. We cycle through all the sleep stages in about 90 minutes on average. So 80 divided by 90 minutes, 8 hours divided by 90 minutes. That's how many cycles we typically go through. So this is what our brain waves look like when we're awake. You can see it's kind of more frequent. It's really rigid. And then when we go into alpha waves, it sort of becomes more spaced out. So when we're watching TV, for example, when we look at a fire for long enough, we go into alpha waves. And these are the relatively slow brain waves of a relaxed, awake state. So you're still awake, but you're kind of slowing down a little bit. But then when you fall asleep, you can see it becomes even more relaxed. Your breathing slows down. Your brain waves become slower and irregular. You may have some hypnagogic hallucinations. This word's important. It's kind of like waking dreams, you could think of it as. So your brain waves change from alpha waves to what we call NREM1 stage. So as you can see, it becomes more spaced apart. It becomes more infrequent. And you're not dreaming yet. But then we descend into NREM2, which becomes more erratic, and then look at NREM3. It's extremely erratic. So that's our deepest phase of sleep. REM sleep, so when we get to our deepest phase of sleep, we have what's called REM sleep, rapid eye movements. So our eye movements, if you look at someone who's in a deep state of sleep, you might see their eyelids moving around like that. So somebody discovered this, the guy Eugene Azarinsky discovered this. So what happens during REM sleep? Our heart rate rises, our breathing becomes rapid, we may have sleep paralysis when the brainstem blocks our motor cortex's messages and the muscles don't move. So this is known as paradoxical sleep because the brain is active but the body is immobile. How about that one, guys? Okay, so we have 8 hours of sleep. We have this cycle. We're awake, we cycle down, we come back up, we cycle down, we come back up. These are the cycles of sleep. So at our lowest point, we're experiencing the heaviest state of REM. And then as the hours go on, we don't get that deep anymore. So the amount we sleep is determined by our biology, age, culture, all these things. Time is running out. I only have 15 minutes. Here we go. Have a good night.